everybody. So for our reading, we read persona in imaginative writing, as well as imagery, connotation, and metaphor, and density and intensity. We also read formal and free verse, I'm so sorry, working with sound, and the poetic line. So one thing I want to point out first in my notes is that in persona, the number one thing that is being referred to is how the voice of the author is going to be different than the voice of the actual person that's writing it. So the author will be a more idealized version of the actual author's voice. It's never exactly the same person. So even if I am speaking in the first person the voice will inevitably be slightly idealized. An example would be the memoir poem written by Anne Sexton Young, where she's speaking about a memory of her in her yard and as a child. And we are, as readers, supposed to put our trust in the author that they are being truthful in that moment, but still it is from the point of view that the author is using a trustworthy voice of memory. So again, this is still slightly separate than the actual voice of the author, because now it is being idealized by the author and written down as the first person. So this is a very interesting relationship between the voice of the author and the actual voice of the author. So the voice of the author, once it's written down, will always be a slightly idealized version of who the author actually is, for the sake of creating the image and for example, memory or mind's eye vision. So this is used in writing in forms of, for example, using different voices, such as being the protagonist or the the comic persona, which is even inflated in vocabulary and exaggerated in its use of imagery. So using different devices in order to create the persona or the voice of the piece that is being read. So that is a very interesting subject. Okie dokie. So then we go into imagery, connotation, metaphor, and density and intensity. And I think it's very important when you're looking at imagery, connotation, and metaphor to understand what those things are. So imagery is using different styles of writing or different keywords, phrases, or devices in order to create an image of what the vision is being portrayed, storyline being portrayed, the setting, the characters, different actions that are taking place or non-actions. And the way that that's done is that it is differentiation between denotation and connotations, meaning the literal versus suggestive by the author. So the author will use devices such as metaphors, cliches, and conceit in order to make up an image of what exactly is taking place in the story to support the flow of the storyline. So for instance, a denotation would be the exact literal meaning of a phrase or word, whereas the connotation is what is being alluded to, or what is being referred to, or what is the image that's being conjured up by the literal meaning of this word. So for example, you can use the word for denotation. I can use I'm trying to use an example. I'm trying to come up with an example, but it's actually a little difficult for me to come up with one. Okay, so denotation versus connotation. I can say the desert scalded the feet of those who walked. So the denotation of the word scald would literally mean to burn and to cook, or to burn. But connotatively, I know as the reader, even if to some extent the experience of the character might be that its feet are burning, that I know that it is only referring to the extreme heat. It's using a form of hyperbole to denote that the author is experiencing a high level of the character is experiencing a high level of heat, but it is not necessarily that the person's feet are literally being scalded or cooked, for instance, if we were to use that word. It is just a form of imagery and hyperbole that is giving me, the reader, the idea that the character is being burned, or the character is experiencing a hot desert, or that the desert itself is very hot, and that the experience of the character gives the reader the image of that. Again, you will go into using metaphors, cliches, and conceit, which are the comparison of two radically different things. Metaphors can include something like the sun was as bright. Well, this would actually be a simile. The sun was as bright as a million stars from the night sky. So that would be a good form of simile. A metaphor could be the child stood under a sea of bright suns in the cool, dark night. This metaphor refers to the character's experience of a starry night without actually using the phrase, the so-and-so character stood under many stars. I'm using sun, which is a radically different term than star, and yet the understanding is still there. A cliche would be, I love you to the moon and back. Or this hyperbole or this metaphor is expressing that I love this person very much, and that I love them so much that the distance of the love would be equal to me going to the moon and back. It creates an image of the person literally running to the moon and coming back. But this is also a cliche because it is said all the time, and therefore in some ways it has lost its meaning, in the sense that someone can say, I love you to the moon and back, which of course they do not literally mean that they love the person so much that they will travel to the moon and back. But it is also a cliche in the sense that the person receiving that letter might think that the statement is so overused that it's now losing its meaning. Another cliche would be, you never know how good you have it until you don't. So though the lesson is there, it is still an overly spoken phrase to refer to what could be experienced as abundance and a taking advantage of privileges and circumstances. So another very important device that should be mentioned here is dead metaphors. So a dead metaphor could be something that has been used so often that it no longer carries any weight. So in the book Imaginative Writing, the example that they use is for the example that they use for a dead metaphor is here, specifically in the book, it defines a dead metaphor as comparisons that are so familiar that they cease to have any meaning as metaphors, which I think is actually very interesting. One example that they use is the word sift. Fowler's modern English usage uses the word sift to demonstrate the dead metaphor, one that has been used so often that speaker and hearer have ceased to be aware that the words used are not literal. So this is a really good example. Thus, in the men were sifting the meal, we have a literal use of sift. In Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. Sift is a live metaphor. In the sifting of evidence, the metaphor is so familiar that it is equally possible that either sifting or examination will be used, and that a sieve is not present to the thought. So the word sift refers to an actual tool used, if you're denoting it, to sieve, an actual sieve to sift through, for example, grains of fine dust in order to find nuggets of gold used during the gold rush. They would use screens in wood panels in order to sift the dirt. In this phrase, we have the literal use of the word sift, where men were sifting the meal as they were going through the meal. They were sifting the grains of meal in order to get the finer grains out. Or, for example, in my example, the miner sifted through the riverbed dirt in order to find the nuggets of gold. So this is actually the use of the word sift from the noun sieve. The verb sift refers to the action of using the tool, a sieve. In the live metaphor, the phrase, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. In my preference, I could even say, God hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. It basically is saying that this celestial being has desired to have this individual, and therefore it is sifting through these collections of people in order to pick one in particular. This is a live and often unused metaphor for the word. Now, I think a dead metaphor can also be referred to as a cliche as well, in the sense that it's so familiar that it no longer is referred to as a metaphor. So, for example, in the phrase, the detectives sifted through the evidence, or the tax collector sifted through their notes, it no longer refers to using the word sift as a metaphor, rather as a antonym for examination, which would be the evidence was reviewed, right? So it's a way to create an image that connotates the action of going through many items as if they were grains of sand, looking for the one nugget, looking for that one gold nugget, or that one item desired that did not fall through the sieve, the screen. So very interesting, very, very good example. One more thing that is mentioned in this reading is density, which is used to raise the intensity of a piece. So using contrary feelings in the same motion, meaning that many elements are used all at once. I love the example that's given by the author, where it states that many different things are included in one poem that are happening all at once to create the structure of the story, or structure of the message or meaning behind the poem, which increases the intensity of the feeling received by the reader. Then we go on to the formal and free verse, working with sounds, and the poetic line. I was just going through a book summary on the Aeneid by Virgil, and he uses a septometer or sesmeter, which I might be saying that wrong, but basically it means that Virgil used a structure of poem where each line had 6 to 6, it was either 6 or 16, I think it's 16 syllables, with the breaks of short, long, long, or long, short, short, and then long, long. So the emphasis on each syllable matches the pentameter of the line before it. So this creates a metronome or a metrometer. It creates a meter of devices that make it so that the poem itself has a structure that is similar to a song, which in many cases these poems were indeed read as songs. I like the use of free verse, though, in the sense that Charlie Smith refers to his quote. The book Imaginative Reading refers to the quote by Charlie Smith: "Every poetry tradition is a formal exercise, and every fully made poem is formally complete." So this is giving authors the freedom to have free verse, breaking free from rhythm, rhyme, and different patterns that are considered traditional. Also in that same paragraph, it's referring to mnemonic devices, which are indeed used in great length poems, like, for example, the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of God, in the Mahabharata, or Virgil's Aeneid, which I would even go as far as saying that Dante also replicated in his Divine Comedy, because he was so inspired by Virgil 1,000 years later. I believe that the mnemonic devices are used as pentameters for memory. So, for example, if you have different forms of rhythm in consonants, assonants, and alliterations, that means the consonants used in the words, the pattern of consonants and vowels, the stress on those vowels and consonants in the word, in the placement of the word, in the line, including also the alliteration, which is the consonant used at the beginning of the word or vowel used at the beginning of the word. This creates a rhythm similar to a song that has a metronome, that has a metrometer, that has a pattern or a rhythm that can be repeated, that allows for the reader or reciter to remember or memorize the entire length of the poem. In which case, if other writers use the same style, then a collection of poems or great epic stories can be repeated. This is very historically important and relevant, because before the use of the written word, many, many great epics and poems that we still have today were indeed dependent on these mnemonic devices to pass them down traditionally through oral practices, including, for example, whether they were done ceremonially or done in the theater or done in the academic setting. That to me is very fascinating, and it is something that I am very passionate about, as I love to recite poetry. With that being said, the last but not least is the poem written by Sherman Alexie at Navajo Monument Valley. We are meant to describe what we are envisioning as we read this poem. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and read it before I discuss it here with you right now. Okay, so this is a poem by Sherman Alexie at Navajo Monument Valley Tribal School. The football field rises to meet the mesa. Indian boys gallop across the grass against the beginning of their body. On those Saturday afternoons, unbroken horses gather to watch their sons growing larger in the small parts of the world. Everyone is the quarterback. There is no thin man in a big hat writing down all the names in 2 columns, winners and losers. This is the eternal football game, Indians versus Indians. All the skins in the wooden bleachers, fancy dancing, stomping red dust straight down into nothing before the game is over. The 8th grade girls track team comes running, circling the field, their thin and brown legs echoing wild horses, wild horses, wild horses. So one thing I really want to mention about this poem is that each line, each verse, each stanza goes into the next one as if telling a story. So there's a continuous flow. The football field rises. So the poem starts off with 6 syllables. To meet the Mesa Indian boys. 9 syllables. Gallop across the grass against. So we're seeing that it's staying in between 6 and 9, and the punctuation allows it to flow into the next line and stop. So you have 4 stanzas before the end of the first sentence, and there's not necessarily any rhyming, but there is a rhythm to the poem that allows it to be read. But there's also a use of imagery as well, using the term horses, thin brown legs echoing wild horses. Here also referring to the sons being the offspring of these stallions or the parent horses. So they're comparing the indigenous Native Americans of this school to horses, in both aesthetic as well as performance. You can compare this to the strength of the horse, the beauty of the horse, the color of the horse. It is also giving you the imagery of the setting, stomping red dust straight down into nothing. So this is the experience specifically of a student or a teacher or a parent that would be going to this school. So whether you are a student in Michigan and you're only familiar with snowfall and forest, you are now receiving the imagery of what it would be like to be a student, learning that in these schools they are surrounded by red dust. What we can most likely assume is also on the reservation. So this is giving you a unique experience behind the experience of what it would be like, as the title states, as written by Sherman Alexie, to go to the school at Navajo Monument Valley Tribal School and be on the sports field. So this must be also a very important community experience to be in the student body athletic department. So this is a very interesting poem. I love the use of the imagery as well as set and setting, and I also love the contemporary nature of it. With that being said, thank you so much, and until next week, bye.